Good evening, everyone. I'm Kyle Hosier, the principal at the junior senior high school. Thank you for being here tonight. And we're joined here with our assistant superintendent of schools, Mr. Brian Paul.
Everyone.
You have received a ton of communications from us over the last 6 months, and we want to use tonight's time, dedicate it solely to the bond propositions that will be up for vote on Tuesday, May 18th. And Mr. Paul is here to give us a
good evening, everyone. I'm Kyle Hosier, the principal at the junior senior high school. Thank you for being.
And with that detailed overview, we have some important information that we want to offer, but then leave a lot of time at the end to answer any questions that you may have. And we're fortunate because Mr. Paul does have a lot of the details because he and his team have been working on this bond for a long time. So with that, just as a reminder, we shared a Google form with you earlier today. You can use that Google form to submit questions. You can submit questions now, or you could wait and submit questions at the end of the presentation because some of your questions will likely be answered as we go through the evening. With that, Brian, I turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Kyle. Good evening, everyone. This has been a really long process for us, not only this year, but over the past many years to get to the point where we are today. And we're getting really close to that May 18th vote, and appreciate anyone who's tuning in tonight to take the time to listen, hopefully have some questions answered, and to make sure that everybody has a chance to be as informed as they can be on the day that they go to make their own vote. Talk a little bit about the process that we've been going through over the years. This really goes way back into early 2018 when we started to work with various stakeholder groups, parents, maybe many of you, teachers, students, faculty members, to really identify what the most critical needs are in Edgemont. Edgemont is a school district that I know many of you have come to for the schools, and we are deeply invested in ensuring that our facilities and our resources represent the quality and standards that you all expect and that we expect of a quality school district like Edgemont. Our buildings in Edgemont are antiquated. We are out of space in many of the locations, and we have some structural challenges as it relates to site plans across all three schools. And these were really some of the areas that were identified as the most critical and in need of immediate attention. Through the work with stakeholders and with an eye on fiscal responsibility and collaboration, we had actually landed in a position where we thought we would be presenting a fully autonomous, self-contained new building to be built on the junior senior high school campus, which might house anywhere from a 3 or 4 grade band span. It might have been 6, 7, and 8. It could have been 9, 10, 11, and 12. But we were in a position where we thought that would be the direction that we would be heading. And then, like many things that have happened to all of us over the last couple of years, the pandemic has put a shift and a wrinkle into those plans. As a result of the pandemic, in refining our work, we've chosen to scale back the scope of work that is to be accomplished in the bond propositions that we have out there today. And in doing so, we've really tried to work with each of the groups to identify the areas that are not just important for our future, but also address longstanding issues and concerns that we've had. Those two areas, as I identified earlier, really relate to the overall space and square footage that we have across our 3 campuses, and the way that it is utilized in terms of scheduling, and the site access as it relates to vehicular access for parents and students and emergency vehicles across the campuses. The board has been really cognizant of the fact that we have some debt that is rolling off due to an outstanding bond that was issued to build the E-building at the junior senior high school campus years ago, that will be rolling off in the 22-23 school year. And we've timed this bond proposition to come to fruition in the subsequent year, with the hopes there of being that any new incurred debt that we would take on for these projects would have the least impact to the taxpayers on a year-to-year basis and smooth the overall tax ask from one year to the next. In terms of timeline, the bond propositions that we'll speak about tonight would come to fruition in the 23-24 school year. And that new debt that would be coming on would hopefully, would replace some of the outstanding debt that will be rolling off in the previous year. Hi, Victoria. I'm going to, Victoria, now that you're hopping in here, we're just giving a kind of high-level overview of the process, where we started, where we're going. I'm going to jump into an overall description of the bond, and then I'll pass it back to you to kind of summarize some of those parts. I'm going to walk you through using our website and some of the architectural sketches that we have, the two propositions that we have for you and the total costs, while outlining the important scope of work that will be included in each of them. As part of our plan to scale back the overall scope of the project, we also chose to split the proposition into two separate ones. And so on May 18th, during the vote, you'll see three propositions on your ballot. The first proposition will relate directly to the budget. And then below that, you'll see two bond propositions. Bond proposition 1, and let me share my screen. Bond proposition 1 is coming in at just under $39 million and has a main focus of addressing the space issues and the inadequacies that we have regarding space across the Greenville campus, and most importantly, at the junior senior high school, while also addressing some of the infrastructure needs that need to be addressed at Sealy Place. Namely, the unit ventilators that need to be replaced in the classrooms that will be replaced with a fully functioning HVAC air conditioning system. Bond proposition 2, it's a total of about $15 million, is contingent upon the passing of bond proposition 1. What that means is that bond proposition 2 alone cannot be passed by the community. We must have a successful vote on bond proposition 1 to then allow for bond proposition 2 to pass. By splitting the bond propositions up into two in this contingent fashion, in no way is suggesting that bond proposition 2 and the scope of work contained in it is not important and critical to the district. In fact, if bond proposition 2 were not to pass, it is going to be something that we will have to address in the near future, as the site work, access ways, and cafeteria expansions are in need of addressing. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail into bond proposition 1, but while I'm on the website, I do want to point out the link for the site is www.edgemont.org/bond. And the way that we've structured this website is it gives any user the level of specificity that they hope to gain from it. You can do a high-level quick touch on the overview and the purpose and timeline while exploring the propositions. You can dig deeper into tax implications, take a look at the site plans that I'll be showing you this evening, taking a look at the frequently asked questions, looking at enrollment studies and space studies that help support the need that we have. We encourage you to use this as a resource. And if tonight whets your appetite for that, and we'd love to see people direct themselves to that area in the future. Let me just switch screens. Give me 1 second. All right, in bond proposition 1, I'm going to focus my efforts tonight really on the junior senior high school, since that's the parent subgroup that we have here. But I know at the same time, many of you may have younger children that are at the elementary schools, and I will touch on those areas as well. The major project that will be going on in bond proposition 1 at the junior senior high school is a new addition. If you look at the bottom right-hand corner of my screen, the light gray area that you see represents the current A building, the addition to a current A building, and it's replicated in a larger format in the center of your screen. This addition would be approximately 22,000 square feet, and it would house up to 14 additional classrooms on the junior senior high school campus. We keep using the language of up to because the educational specificity and final detailed plans will be developed this summer, hopefully after a successful bond vote. This new addition would have a fortified foundation that would allow for vertical growth down the road if we needed to add additional space to the campus. Currently, at Greenville and the junior senior high school, none of the buildings that exist could support a second floor at this point in time. And we're committed to, in future plans, to build a new addition to make sure that the buildings that we do build do have foundations that would support it. This building would be fully air conditioned, having an HVAC system contained within, and really provides the high school an opportunity to design a space in multiple spaces that fit contemporary educational needs. After the completion of this new addition, up in the upper area of the screen, you see the white part that represents the current A building. We would move the students into the new addition, and the current A building would undergo a complete gut renovation. The current A building, not just based on proximity and an area that we had to the ability to grow off of, happens to be the building across our 3 campuses that is in most need of repairs. There is moisture issues that relate to the foundation, a concrete slab foundation underneath that would be addressed, as well as the classrooms in this building are generally outdated and in need of modernization to come to current standards. With that gut renovation, there'd be a complete mechanical overhaul as well, providing a fully functioning HVAC air conditioning system to this part of the A building as well, which would give us approximately 25 classrooms in that one area of the campus that would be fully air conditioned. At Greenville, and I'll touch on this as well, we needed to acquire additional space. We would build a new wing with 5 classrooms, or up to 5 classrooms, on the left-hand side of the screen that would allow for expansion both vertically with a 2nd floor and, as you see in the outlined area above, to continue and make an additional wing if future expansion was necessary. Similar to the junior senior high school, any new addition that we build, the mechanical infrastructure that we would put in place would be modernized and would ensure that it is fully functioning HVAC system with air conditioning. I mentioned earlier, but also contained in Proposition 1 is some mechanical work to the Sealy Place. Sealy Place has an aging out unit ventilator system across its original footprint. What that means is that about 70% of the Sealy Place classrooms and spaces have unit ventilators that bring in air from the outside directly through a unit in the classroom to offer air exchange. We would retrofit and or completely replace those with a fully functioning HVAC system, providing air conditioning to approximately 70% of the current square footage in Sealy Place at this time. Proposition 2, and although much smaller in the scope or quantity, dollar value, contains a lot of really critical and important aspects. And I'm going to lump them into 2 categories. The first of which is cafeteria expansions and renovations. At the junior senior high school, our current cafeteria space is too small for our student population. We currently offer 4 lunches in order to accommodate the overall student population that we have, based on the seats that are available and occupancy ratings. In addition to that, the servery, where students get their lunch, is very cattle-like. It's like herding cattle. You're in these kind of stalls walking in straight lines, and it's not an efficient way to deliver food to students in any current space that we could have. The process by which we would expand here is that we would take this darker blue area you see on the right-hand side by pushing out the current existing cafeteria, increasing the square footage by approximately 3,800 square feet. In doing so, we would reclaim the cafeteria annex, which is currently utilized as a classroom, for additional seating in the cafeteria, and would completely redesign the servery to be a more open, free-flowing station that would allow students to access the food in a much more efficient way. At Greenville, a similar amount of work would be done. The dark blue area you see here represents a staging area that is at a higher level than the regular floor. We would level that to bring it down to the same level, increasing the square footage for seating, while constructing a prep and serving area with a warming kitchen up in the upper right-hand corner. The purpose of that, not that dissimilar from what we would do at Sealy Place by creating a serving and prep area, is to allow us to deliver food service at the elementary schools, which we have not been able to do in the past. What we would do is in the high school kitchen, we would prepare food daily and have that shipped to the elementary schools so that a hot lunch could be served to the students each day at each of the elementary schools. In addition to the work on the cafeterias, significant site work related to vehicular access, emergency vehicle access, and parking would take place. At the high school, As many of you know, and if it's your first year at the high school, you might have just gotten your first taste of it this week with us reopening in a greater capacity. But we have one major access point, and it's off of White Oak Lane. What tends to happen is that the traffic at pickup and drop-off times spills up all the way up White Oak Lane, runs through the staging areas in front of the administrative building and gymnasium, and often then spills back out onto Edgemont Road, onto neighboring streets, and even all the way down to Central Park Ave. There are three broad goals that we have at all three of the sites to try to alleviate some of these issues. The first is to try to reduce the overall traffic that exists at singular access points. The second is to improve the parking and increase the number of parking spaces on campuses to assist with day-to-day parking issues, but also on major events where we really do struggle to bring in additional cars. And then third, and maybe most importantly, it's to address the longstanding issue that's been brought to our attention from our emergency responders related to the lack of emergency vehicle access, in particular at times where traffic is very high. As you can imagine, if you've seen the traffic on White Oak Lane at pickup or drop off, getting a fire truck up that hill at that point in time, or an ambulance at that point in time to access this part of the campus is virtually impossible. In order to solve that at the junior senior high school, the goal would be to build a new 2-lane access road that comes off of Artillery Lane down by the pond, which is currently a dirt pathway that has been used for construction vehicles in the past, that would have a walking sidewalk for students and would bring them up to the newly constructed A building extension, which you see here in blue. It would terminate in a roundabout. Just bring it a little closer for you, up by that new building, and have its own dedicated parking area off to the right here. In addition to that, we would redefine and reconstruct the parking area that currently exists off of Old Colony, and by removing the traffic circle there and bringing it over here a little bit further south. These two traffic circles and two parking lots would function independent of each other. Where you see this white dotted line in the middle, there would be a barrier system in place that would be able to be accessed only by emergency vehicles when in times of need to pass through from the Artillery Road access point to the Old Colony access point. We recognize that it is important to maintain to create an access point for emergency vehicles to not only access the E building and resource building that you see at the top of the screen, but also to assist emergency vehicles in accessing homes that are on the end of Old Colony Road. We've been told by members of the fire department, and although they can't give exact numbers without the road's construction yet, that they would anticipate response time to the E building and resource building and those homes in that neighboring area to be cut in half with the creation of this new passageway. In addition to that, what you see on this light gray pathway that runs along the C building and B building is currently a dirt passageway that's used by our maintenance vehicles and can be traversed by light emergency vehicles, but not by a ladder truck or anything of significant weight. We would fortify that surface and make it a hard surface that would allow for passageway for emergency vehicles to access the B building and C building by ladder, which they currently cannot do. Similar work would be done at Greenville with the same three broad goals in place: to increase parking, to reduce the overall traffic and the impact on neighboring streets, while adding an additional access point that serves both as a benefit to parents for drop-off and pickup, but also for emergency support. If you focus in on the front of the building, this light gray area that runs north to south on my screen now is a new staging lane that would be used to be able to stage cars and bring some of the staging that's occurring on Glendale Road off of that area. What would occur then is that the loop would come down through the same passageway that they do now, up the new staging lane and into the parking lot to exit back out off Glendale Road. In addition, a 2-lane access road, like the one coming off of Artillery at the junior senior high school, would be constructed off the Ardsley Road jug handle that runs along the play field and into the parking lot in the back, allowing for, again, a turnaround that can function independent of the main turnaround in the front of the building. To accomplish this, we would actually turn the existing play field and rotate it a little bit. We would reconstruct the playground, add additional fencing to protect the playground and play field, retaining walls and fencing around the tennis courts to make sure that we create a safe environment with a passageway cutting through that campus space. In addition, a new parking area would be defined to expand the parking for pickup and drop-off purposes and for overflow parking on day-to-day and for main events at the school. At Sealy Place, the work is a little bit more complex because the site is a little bit more complex, but same three broad goals: a new parking area off of Ardsley Road over on the left-hand side of the screen that was once tennis courts and adjacent to the Greenville Church, that would have a lighted walking path that connects to the main parking lot. We would create a new traffic circle in the back of the building off of Henry Street that would allow for an additional drop-off and turnaround location for parents. And you see this dark green passageway that runs along the back of the school by the cafeteria. That would be a fortified subsurface with natural grass over it that would allow for emergency vehicles like a ladder truck to access the back of the building with a ladder. We continue to look at additional options as we know that there are always challenges on Kennedy Way leading into the school off Sealy Place. Namely, we are still exploring as to whether this white area along Sealy Place that runs next to the basketball courts could be reclaimed and utilized as additional staging for cars. As I wrap up that part, we did just get, and this is new, and so you're one of the first to see this, our architects have put some 3D renderings in place for the high school, and I'd like to show some of those. So this right here is the part you see in brick would be the new addition to the current A building, which is in gray and attached to it. You'll see that there's the new roundabout at the lower part of the screen with the access road coming up along the left-hand side from Artillery Lane. You can see the site work a little bit better from this view. You can see the two independent traffic circles with independent parking lots with a partition in between that separates and stops the traffic other than for emergency vehicles. You can see, I think the architects have done an excellent job of really fitting the shape and style of this building into the current campus layout. I think lastly, they've got two renderings here of what the new, actually we can go back to this. Up in you can actually see in the upper part of the screen, the addition to the cafeteria space as it juts out now towards where there's actually a vegetable garden to the side of this little triangular region, and some site plans on the inside or renderings that show a far more modernized and contemporary space that would be encouraging for students to utilize outside of just their lunch periods, with small little areas that could be used for collaboration and work, could be used for large groups instruction, classroom activities, and certainly utilized by the community as well. And I think this is just the alternate view from the other direction inside there. Victoria, I always feel as though I missed some parts in this, but before I even go to you, if you can think of anything that I did miss, Kyle, I think it would be beneficial to hear from you as you consider some of these updates to the junior senior high school. What would the impact be for staff, for students with these changes?
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, I think it's important to think about how do these propositions move us forward? How do they increase opportunities for students? So again, to summarize, under Proposition 1, we would renovate a building, add a new building with enough square footage for 14 additional classrooms. And in the A building and new space, both of those would be air conditioned. The new additional square footage, simply put, would allow us to schedule classes in a way that ensures students get to take the classes they want more than we can now. So to understand that, we have 4 lunch periods under our current 9-period schedule in a typical year. Outside of the 4 lunch periods, those periods, all of our classrooms are scheduled. So when we build the master schedule, let's say that we have students who want to take a class. And we know that if we move the class from period 8 to period 2, more students could take the class. We have to look to see, are there classrooms available during period 2? If they're not, we can't make the switch and students can't then take the class. And unfortunately, we've seen that happen quite a lot over at least the 3 years that I've been here. Additionally, when we talk about offering a new class for students, one of the first things we have to think about is, do we have space for the class on campus? And again, we've had times where we haven't had space, so we couldn't offer that class. The Proposition 1 also offers air conditioning for these 2 spaces. When it's 90 degrees outside and almost the same temperature inside, students are thinking to themselves, I'm hot, I want to cool off. They're not thinking about the material that they're supposed to be engaged in during the lesson. We know that when students are comfortable, they learn best, and when they're not, learning becomes more difficult. Under Proposition 2, again, just to summarize what the changes would be, we would have a larger cafeteria, and that cafeteria could be used for students. It could also be used as a commons. We would have an additional roadway and a second drop-off pickup point for the campus. Brian, you talked a lot about the roadway, so I don't want to add too many details there other than to say, if you've been stuck on the hill on the way into school and it feels like you've been there for an hour, you probably can appreciate why we need an additional roadway. And of course, there's the safety concerns when we do have that type of traffic. I would like to talk a little more about the larger cafeteria. So right now, again, we have 4 lunch periods, and we have 4 lunch periods because the cafeteria is too small for the number of students that we have on campus. So our schedule is truly built around the need to have 4 lunch periods. It's not built around what we think is in the best interest of students. And we've learned this year, probably better than any other year, that the schedule that we offer students drives the student experience. So if we ever want to be in a position where we want to think beyond the 9-period day, move beyond that schedule, we want to have the flexibility of having a larger cafeteria so we don't have to have 4 separate distinct lunch periods for students. The other thing to know is, in terms of the cafeteria, that there are times when the cafeteria is packed and students have reported that they don't have a place to sit. We want to make sure that students have a place to sit, that they can be comfortable when they do have their lunches. The library is also often packed and students report that they need another place to go. So outside of the lunch periods, we have an opportunity. In the pictures that you saw, we can see that it's a great space. The cafeteria space could double as a commons for students to be able to use that to complete work or to socialize. And it can be another opportunity for students to go to that would relieve the space constraints in the library. We think that's super important. It could also be used for clubs. It could be used when we have parent meetings. There's a lot of good that comes from that type of space. So this is a large ask, and I think we understand that as we think about the bond, but we do think that there are real tangible gains for our students as we work through the benefits of the bond. With that, Victoria, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Brian. Good evening, everyone. It's so exciting. As many times as I've participated in conversations about, and of course, the design process to get us here, about the future of Edgemont schools, it's always so exciting to think about it from the student perspective and how we can improve the student experience. So thank you to the PTSA also for hosting us, and to all of you for being here this evening. So you've heard about the specifics about the plan, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how we got here, the journey to get here, and also the importance of your vote on May 18th to preserve this most important community asset, the Edgemont schools. So since 2018, we've gathered information from a host of sources to create the bond proposal. We conducted thorough studies of current space utilization and of enrollment trends. We examined and continued our 5-year capital facilities plan, and we conducted in-person forums, conversations with parents, community groups, faculty and staff, and also the entire community had a chance to respond to a survey. One particular group was a middle-level learners group. We took time to pull together teachers and administrators to study the needs of middle-level learners, those students in grades 5 through 8 or 6 through 8. In fact, prior to the pandemic, based on our research or observations in other school districts, we were ready to recommend a standalone building that could house middle level grades or could be a standalone building to house 9 through 12. However, the pandemic significantly reduced our plan. We were sensitive to the community in terms of the financial impact and wanted to make sure that we were prioritizing what we needed in the most immediate and focused on square footage. That square footage, as you have seen, can provide many different opportunities, whether it relieves pressure on certain areas. We know we have pressure on the auditorium, so by having other large meeting spaces, that can relieve some pressure on the auditorium, provide meeting space for the community as well. We also consulted with architects and engineers. All of the information is on the bond website, as Brian has already shown. And I think it's just important to know that we prioritized and that the time is now. Edgemont focuses always on excellence, fiscal responsibility, and collaboration. I've talked a little bit about the collaboration that got us here, and you heard a little bit from Kyle about how the space can continue to provide that excellence. In fact, improve that excellence that has been limiting, the space constraints have been limiting us in terms of the courses we can offer and in terms of whether or not the students can get into those courses because of the space constraints of the schedule. So with that, the timing is now, and that's because of our attention to fiscal responsibility. We have older debt that is rolling off, so the timing of the bond vote is to take advantage of the rolling off debt in order to smooth the experience for the Edgemont taxpayers. Of course, if we're doing more, you're paying for more, but in so doing, it's the least possible impact to the taxpayer. And again, that tax impact can be viewed on the website. Brian, I don't know if you got to speak to that specifically, but we were pleased as we worked through that impact. And in terms of the asset to the community, believed that certainly was a fiscally responsible approach. Bonding is the way that schools can take on a project such as this. And we are excited to answer your questions, to continue answering questions, and please do vote on May 18th. You can look for an absentee ballot if you need an absentee ballot as a result of COVID-related issues. That application will be on our website and also is available in the district office. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Kyle, and we'll happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Victoria. As a reminder, earlier today, I shared an email that had the link for this meeting and a Google form that you can use to submit questions. We currently have one question that has been submitted. So if you do have questions, please take a moment to submit those questions. And I'll paraphrase the questions a bit, skip any ones that might be repeat. The first question we have is asking, why are we going to remove a green space on Ardsley Road when we have a large parking lot next to the church that the church will let us use for a nominal fee?
So at Sealy Place School, we have access issues, parking issues throughout the day. The church does charge parents to park in the parking lot for drop off and pickup. The green space was previously used as tennis courts and would be used as a parking area. The decision hasn't been made in terms of what the surface of that parking area would look like, but the space is already there. The path is already there. The path would be lit and a little bit more accessible than it is at the moment.
Thank you. Next question, of the older debt, how much bond principal is maturing in 22, 23 and over the subsequent years? How do I find this information on the website?
Yeah, so the bond that covered the cost of the e-building and other various items. We'll make our final bond payment in the 22-23 school year of just over $1.2 million. So that's the debt that we keep speaking to as rolling off. We do have a few other outstanding obligations. The two-part bond that supported the new field at the junior senior high school, as well as the building envelopes, the windows, roofs, doors that were done, as well as a energy performance contract that comes with some carrying costs as well. We do have that energy performance contract debt does roll off in the 26-27 school year. And the total debt obligations will be available when the budget does come out in terms of what our next year's obligations will be for that. But I'm happy to answer any questions that people have if they want to reach out to me separately via email and want more details.
Those are the two questions we've have submitted so far. So we'll wait another minute and see if anyone else has questions we can answer.
Kyle, I'll throw one out there. We held a meeting this morning as well for the PTA hosted us at Greenville. And I just thought one interesting question, because it's maybe the most important one, is what happens if the bond vote does not go in our favor and it fails in May? And I thought, Victoria, you did a nice job of answering. There are really three outcomes for us. Or if you want to take it, or you want me to?
Go for it, Brian. You're on a roll.
Sure. So I think the reality of the situation is that this is work that needs to be done. So the Board of Education and in conjunction with the administrative team could come to the decision to put that bond vote up again, either as is or with some tweaks to it. That has happened in some local districts recently and have had successful bond votes after making sure the communication was clear subsequent to that. The second issue is that we don't do the work and we have to live with the current conditions. Ultimately, that if we are unable to bond some of this work, we will have to see some increases to the capital expenditures in a year to year within our budget in order to address some of the infrastructural needs that are impending, but would be really challenged to be able to add the additional space that would be necessary to support the issues we have now. And I said there were three options, and I've now forgotten what the third good one was that we came up with. I might have combined the first two.
I think you did. So Brian, another question we had this afternoon that I thought was a good one too was how long would the construction take? When would it begin? And in terms of the impact on the students? Yeah,
I think, again, great one. So construction, so there's a process that we didn't say this maybe in the introduction, but our original plan was to have a bond vote in the fall of 2020. And the pandemic certainly shifted us off of that. And so here we are now having it this spring. We're at the end of that cycle that puts us in a position to be able to capture that rolling off debt, which is still great. It puts us on target. But if the bond was to be approved in May, we would immediately get down to getting the educational specificity and the final renderings done. That would go off to the state for approval. That takes a significant amount of time as they vet all of the information. Upon approval, it would then go out to bid for contractors, and we would look to break ground on these projects in the 23-24 school year. If both propositions were to be passed, the expectation is that it would take approximately 2 years while working around the educational schedule and trying to minimize any impact that it would have on the educational component.
We do have a couple more questions that came in. Next question. If the bonds pass, what will be the increase in tax per million of assessed value? How much will it increase compared to base and compared to what is paid with bond now?
So we do have some estimations, and they are up on the website. The estimations are that they are based off of if we had gone out to bond at the time of generation a few months ago. What was the anticipated interest rate? What was the anticipated term? And what is the anticipated state aid that we would receive on this? And I think even before I give the answer to that, important to point out, projects like these are aidable from the state, and we do expect to receive approximately 30% state aid on the overall cost of this, which is an enormous help to the process. Our current estimations suggest that on a home with an assessed value of $1 million, for bond proposition 1, the year-to-year increase from 22-23 to 23-24 would be $65 per million of assessed value. And for propositions 1 and 2, for each $1 million of assessed value, the expectation is an increase of $440 on the tax bill.
Can you talk a little bit about the interest rates we're paying for the bonds that are maturing now?
Certainly. So all of the bonds that we currently have either been refinanced. So they're in a window that we can't refinance again because it has not enough time has passed, or are already had been secured too recently to be able to refinance on them. The 2 bonds that were issued to do the football field and all of the envelopes of the buildings, windows, doors, and roofs are at 1.79 and 2.31% respectively. And the energy performance contract is at 2.84%.
There's a question about the barrier system that was shown. There's a concern that it looks temporary and transitory. What's to stop that from being removed? And then we have a permanent roadway that is going through Old Colony. How do we ensure that that doesn't happen?
So the intent is for it to be used for emergency vehicles only and emergency purposes. The actual fence process to do that has not yet been designed. We've been working with the Old Colony community and will continue to do that to make sure that it satisfies their needs, that it doesn't look like a temporary blockade and is only opened for emergency purposes.
The next question goes back to an earlier question related to the parking lot at the church. They're asking, is it more cost effective to simply pay the church to use their parking lot rather than remove the green space and pay for a new parking lot?
So we've been in ongoing conversations with the church. That really hadn't been a conversation that they were open to. I think that they were happy with their solution to have individuals work directly with them. In fact, they are looking for more parking space as well, and that they have been asking us about that. But we have ongoing conversations with the church and will continue to. But it wasn't a solution that we could count on. And since we already had the space, it was decided to develop that space and utilize it to meet the needs of the Sealy Place School.
Brian, can you talk a little bit more about the total amount of the bonds that will roll off in the next few years? What are the amounts of these payments, and where can the information be found in writing?
Sure. So the one that will most recently roll off that I spoke to earlier, that has a final, we're paying basically, our debt service on is about 1.2 million each year. So that one rolls off in the 22-23 school year. The next to roll off, and we have yearly debt service payments of approximately $300,000, is that energy performance contract that will come off the books in 26-27. And then the 2-part bond that was most recently secured, might have only been 2015, goes all the way to 2030, 2031. And the overall debt service payment on those 2 is just over $1 million per year. Anyone who's interested in seeing the debt service schedule and the overall picture, I'm happy to provide that for them. You just reach out to me via email or give a call to the office. I can certainly do that for you.
The next question is asking what percentage of yes votes are needed in order for the bond to pass?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking. It's just a simple majority. So a simple majority would pass the bond. Again, as Brian mentioned, number one has to pass in order for number two to pass. And of course, also, as Brian mentioned, there will be 3 questions on the ballot on May 18th. The first one is for the budget. So budget proposition, then bond proposition 1, bond proposition 2.
The next question is just clarification. It reads, Mr. Hall said bond 1 would make taxes rise $65 per million, and bond 1 and 2 would make it rise over 400 per million. Since bond 1 is 38 million and bond 2 is 50 million, are those numbers correct?
Yeah, what a great question. And I think, you know, we have tried very hard to be able to articulate the best answer we can for that. It's not that the proposition 2 costs more. It's that the outstanding obligation that we have in the rolling off debt is absorbed in that year-to-year change. So when we describe that $40 increase, that $65 increase, that's not $65 tied directly to that bond. That is in addition to from what the previous year's tax roll was. So with $1.2 million rolling off, the obligation from year to year is close to zero of a difference for Proposition 1. Proposition 2, the full value of that 15 million is in excess of, and so we see a greater relative impact with the addition of that.
And someone submitted almost the same identical question that you just answered. So I'm glad you were able to answer that. Those are all the questions we have at the moment. So again, give everyone a minute to see if there are any other questions that we can answer. No new questions came in. Are there any other details we feel like we should highlight that we haven't discussed yet?
I would just encourage, again, whether it be budget related, whether it be bond related, if you have any questions, concerns, feel as though you need additional info, we want to make sure that every voter is educated and can make an educated decision. So please feel free to reach out to Victoria or I. I know that the board is happy to speak with you as well. If you feel more comfortable filtering your questions through them. We will have continued opportunities. You know, there's always a question forum at each of the Board of Education meetings. So if you have specific questions related to the bond or the budget during those times as well, feel free to ask them in that venue.
2 more questions. First, why is a new performance hall not determined to be critical as part of the new bond offer?
So Brian and I am sure will both take this from different perspectives, but we recently met with the ACE committee. We've been meeting with community groups and parent groups to talk about this. And when we were discussing a standalone school or an autonomous school building that would have included cafeteria, would have included a new auditorium, would have provided an opportunity to bring the 6th graders to the EHS campus as well, and we could have limited construction around the district. But once we had to focus strictly on square footage and instructional space, we focused on the day-to-day experience of the students. This plan relieves pressure on the auditorium, relieves pressure on instructional spaces for music, and again focuses on the day-to-day experience. The performance space is the main interface for parents, and we know, and community members, and we know that's important. But for the approximately 15 nights a year, for that interface with parents, we had to prioritize for the day-to-day experience of students. We did price doing an upgrade to the current auditorium, which would not help the day-to-day experience. And Brian, maybe want to just talk a little bit about that, about the research we did on that. He's losing. So we worked with our architect on what we could do to improve, because the main problem is the stage size and fitting all of our musicians on stage.
Sorry, I could not unmute. So yes, we did do in the planning stages. This was certainly identified as a critical one. I think the key distinction is that it was not a renovation; it was a reconstruction of the auditorium space in order to accomplish what would be necessary to support the overall size on the stage and in the seating area. It would be a complete 90-degree reorientation of an expansion, and the overall cost of that was in the $7 to $8 million range for that work alone. That did not include the additional work that would then have to be done to the administrative building to bring it to ADA compliance once work is done in that space. I do think, and Victoria and I, we've spoken about this a lot as we've met with different committees and groups. It is certainly, I would put this in the critical area too. I think there's a lot of things that are not in the final area that we settle on that we could throw in critical, or at least a high need area that we will need to look to address in subsequent years, whether it be through operating budgets or future decisions to bond down the road.
Next question. Assuming both propositions pass, when can we expect construction to start, and when do we expect it to be completed?
So the best estimation, so 23-24 school year is when we would expect to see construction begin, and the hope would be in a 2-year window, so by the 25-26 school year.
And again, those are all the questions that we have this evening. We do want to encourage anyone, if you do have other questions that you think of, please reach out to us. We know the more information you have so you can make an informed vote, the better. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I also just want to say, with having all of our students back on campus now who want to go for the full day option, it feels like school again. There's joy on campus, there's excitement. I think everyone is reminded why we went into education. All of the work that we do is for our kids, and it's awesome to have them back. So I hope they're excited to be back. I hope you're hearing that when they come home, but it is fantastic to have them back on campus, and glad that we have some more time together this year before the summer. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.